The destroyer cuts through the North Sea at 28 knots, its crew scanning the horizon for threats. It's April 2nd, 1945, and the German warship Z-33 represents everything the Allies fear about Hitler's naval resurgence. 800 tons of steel, 4 5-inch guns, torpedo tubes loaded and ready. The vessel has already sent 3 merchant ships to the bottom this month alone. Then the lookouts spot them. 6 aircraft flying impossibly low over the water. The silhouettes are wrong, too small, too slow. The anti-aircraft crews hesitate. These planes look like they belong in a county fair, not a combat zone. Canvas and plywood construction, fixed landing gear. A design so primitive that German intelligence dismissed it as a training aircraft. The commander laughs. Biplanes? The British are sending us biplanes? What he doesn't know is that in 43 seconds his ship will be on fire. In 4 minutes it will be listing 30 degrees. In 6 minutes he'll be screaming abandon ship orders as the Z-33 begins its final plunge to the seabed. And the weapon that destroys his vessel? A torpedo dropped from an aircraft that shouldn't even be able to carry one. The statistics tell an impossible story. Between 1940 and 1945, these obsolete aircraft sink or damage 680,000 tons of Axis shipping. They destroy 2 destroyers, a submarine, 6 E-boats, and countless supply vessels. Their pilots achieve this with a 92% survival rate, flying an aircraft that every aviation expert in Britain said would be a death trap. The plane is the Fairey Swordfish. The Royal Navy calls it the Stringbag. The Germans have another name, der tödliche Dinosaurier, the deadly dinosaur. And the story of how this flying relic became the most effective anti-shipping aircraft of World War II begins not in a cutting-edge laboratory, but in the mind of a frustrated engineer who everyone said was stuck in the past. This is the story of how the slowest combat aircraft in the war became the most feared, how obsolescence became an advantage, and how a man they called old-fashioned changed naval warfare forever. The North Atlantic, 1939. The British Admiralty faces an existential nightmare. German U-boats are sinking merchant ships faster than Britain can build them. The statistics are catastrophic. 1.5 million tons of Allied shipping lost in the first 6 months of war alone. At this rate, Britain will starve before Hitler's armies ever cross the Channel. The Royal Navy's response seems obvious. Deploy modern torpedo bombers. The Fleet Air Arm operates the newest designs, the Blackburn Skua and the Bristol Beaufort. Sleek, fast, metal monoplanes with retractable landing gear and enclosed cockpits. Everything military aviation doctrine says a combat aircraft should be. But there's a problem. The modern bombers are failing catastrophically. The Beaufort, with its 1,600 horsepower engines and 225-mile-per-hour top speed, sounds impressive, until you factor in its operational reality. The aircraft requires 1,000 yards of smooth runway. Its torpedoes demand release at precisely 120 miles per hour, at exactly 90 feet altitude, within 600 yards of the target. Miss any parameter, and the torpedo tumbles uselessly into the sea or explodes on impact. The margin for error is essentially 0. Combat results prove devastating. On April 12, 1940, 6 Beauforts attacked German shipping off Norway. 4 are shot down. The survivors score no hits. On June 11th, another squadron attempts a convoy attack. All 9 aircraft are destroyed. The squadron losses reach 78% within 8 months. Crews call it suicide duty. The Skua performs even worse. Its underpowered engine struggles to lift both torpedoes and fuel. Pilots must choose, carry weapons, or have enough range to return home. On September 26, 1939, 16 Skuas attack the German cruiser Königsberg. 15 are destroyed by flak, 0 hits recorded. Air Marshal Hugh Dowding summarizes the expert consensus in a November 1939 memo. Torpedo bombing requires speed, altitude capability, and armor protection. Only modern metal monoplane construction can provide these characteristics. Canvas-covered biplanes belong in museums, not combat zones. The naval staff agrees. They commissioned 3 new designs: the Fairey Barracuda, the Blackburn Firebrand, and imports of American Avengers. Combined production target, 850 aircraft by mid-1941. But 1941 is 18 months away. Every week, another 40,000 tons of shipping sinks. The mathematics are simple and terrible. Britain has enough food reserves for 8 months at current loss rates. After that, starvation, surrender, Nazi occupation. The Fleet Air Arm needs torpedo bombers now, not next year, not when production ramps up. Now. And there's only 1 aircraft available in sufficient numbers. The very plane every expert has already dismissed. The aircraft that lost the competition to the Skua back in 1936. The design that's older than most of the pilots who would fly it. The Fairey Swordfish, 323 already built, another 200 in production. An aircraft so primitive that it uses the same basic wing design as the 1917 Sopwith Cuckoo. Maximum speed, 138 miles per hour. That's slower than a Messerschmitt 109 with its landing gear down. When the Admiralty suggests pressing the Swordfish into frontline service, the Air Ministry response is immediate and scathing. Unacceptable losses are guaranteed. We'll be sending air crews to certain death. What none of them understand yet is that every assumption they're making about modern aerial warfare is wrong. And the man who's about to prove it isn't even a pilot. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmonde sits in the Fleet Air Arm headquarters at Lyon-Solent, studying loss reports with growing frustration. It's January 1940, and he's supposed to be planning torpedo attack doctrine. Instead, he's writing condolence letters. Esmond's credentials don't fit the typical naval aviator profile. He's 34 years old, ancient by fighter pilot standards. He earned his wings at age 30 after serving as a ship's gunnery officer. No engineering degree, no test pilot experience. The other officers call him Granddad. His personnel file contains the notation, capable administrator, limited combat aptitude. But Esmond has something the aviation experts lack. He spent 8 years on destroyer decks, watching torpedo attacks from the target's perspective. He knows what actually works versus what looks good in theoretical papers. And watching the loss reports pile up, he has a realization that contradicts every piece of modern aviation wisdom. The problem isn't that British torpedo bombers are too slow. It's that they're too fast. Esmond pulls the engagement reports. The Beauforts and Skuas are getting slaughtered during their attack runs. But the kills aren't happening randomly. The losses cluster at specific moments. During the high-speed torpedo release, The pilots need to maintain exact altitude and airspeed while managing a 2,000-pound torpedo and evading flak. It's 3 simultaneous tasks, each demanding complete concentration. Under combat stress, pilots fixate on one parameter and lose control of the others. The aircraft slam into waves, the torpedoes tumble, the attacks fail. But slow aircraft don't have this problem. The Swordfish, with its stall speed of 55 miles per hour, can release torpedoes at 90 miles per hour with 100 feet of altitude margin. The pilot has twice as long to line up the shot. The observer has time to actually observe, tracking the target, calculating deflection angles, calling corrections. Then Esmond notices something else in the reports, something that makes him sit up straight. On November 21st, 1939, a Swordfish on routine patrol encountered the German submarine U-64. The pilot, Lieutenant Commander W.L.M. Brown, dropped to 50 feet and released his torpedo at 85 miles per hour. Direct hit. The U-boat sank in 3 minutes. The interesting part? German survivors reported they never heard the aircraft approaching. The Swordfish's fabric-covered airframe and low-speed engine created minimal noise signature. By the time lookouts spotted it, the torpedo was already in the water. Esmond does the mathematics. Lower speed equals longer time over target. But if the enemy can't hear you coming, that disadvantage becomes irrelevant. The Swordfish is so slow, it's actually stealthy. He starts sketching modifications, reinforced tail structure to handle low-altitude turbulence, modified torpedo release mechanism for slower airspeed, new attack doctrine emphasizing surprise over speed. When he presents his findings to the Fleet Air Arm Command, the response is immediate. Commander Esmond, that is illegal under international aviation safety standards. You're proposing combat operations below minimum design limits. Esmond doesn't have authorization. He doesn't have official support. What he has is Squadron 825, 24 Swordfish aircraft that survived the Norwegian campaign, and a commanding officer who's willing to look the other way. RAF Worthy Down, February 1940. In a maintenance hangar after midnight, Esmond and 3 mechanics modify a Swordfish that officially doesn't exist. The squadron's paperwork lists it as awaiting parts. In reality, they're rebuilding it for operations no aircraft has attempted. They strengthen the tail assembly with additional bracing. The standard Swordfish tail wasn't designed for sustained low-altitude flight through destroyer wakes and shell bursts. The modifications add 180 pounds of weight, but stability at 50 feet matters more than climbing performance. They install a new torpedo release mechanism, jury-rigged from a skua's bomb shackle. It allows torpedo drops at 70 miles per hour, 30 miles per hour below the Swordfish's normal release speed. The weapon will hit the water harder, but tests show the Mark 12 torpedo can handle the impact. The most radical change is removing the radio. The equipment weighs 200 pounds and requires a separate operator. Esmond calculates that at combat ranges, hand signals work better than static-filled transmissions. The weight savings translates to 45 additional minutes of flight time, or 200 pounds more armor plating around the crew positions. March 8, 1940-06, 30 hours. The modified Swordfish lifts from Worthy Down in pre-dawn darkness. Esmond occupies the observer's seat behind pilot Sub-Lieutenant Pat Jackson. They're officially conducting navigation exercises. The flight plan filed with air traffic control shows them flying to Southampton and back. Instead, they head to the Solent, where HMS Osprey is conducting gunnery practice. Jackson brings the Swordfish down to 60 feet, throttling back to 90 miles per hour. The biplane's fabric skin ripples in the wind. The landing gear seems to touch the wave tops. At this altitude, any mistake means instant death. Esmond watches the destroyer through binoculars. The gunnery crews track them lazily. They're not even manning the close-range weapons. A training biplane poses no threat. 500 yards out, Jackson drops to 40 feet. The Osprey's radar, primitive Type 79 equipment, loses the return. On visual tracking alone, the gunners struggle to track the slow-moving target against the wave patterns. 300 yards, Jackson releases the practice torpedo. It hits the water cleanly, running straight and true. In a combat scenario, it's a direct hit amidships. The Osprey never fired a shot. They repeat the exercise 6 more times over the next week, attacking different vessels without warning. The results are consistent. Against slow, low-flying targets, destroyer defenses prove essentially useless. The ship's radar can't maintain lock. The gunners can't calculate proper lead angles. The close-range weapons can't depress low enough. Esmond's report to Fleet Air Arm Headquarters is 2 pages long. The conclusion is simple. The Swordfish, operated at altitudes and speeds considered unsafe, is more survivable than modern aircraft operating within normal parameters. The response comes within 48 hours. Report to Admiralty immediately. Bring all data. Admiralty House, London, March 18, 1940. 23 senior officers pack the briefing room. Air Vice Marshal Arthur Harris sits in the front row, arms crossed. The Navy's Director of Air Warfare, Rear Admiral Lumley Lister, occupies the center chair. In the corner, taking notes, is a young staff officer named Tom Truebridge. Esmond stands before them, holding his sheaf of test results. He's not a confident public speaker. His hands shake slightly. Several officers exchange knowing glances. This is the old commander who wants to fight a modern war with obsolete aircraft. Harris speaks first. Commander, I've read your report. You're proposing we send air crews into combat at altitudes below peacetime safety minimums in aircraft whose design dates to 1934. The Air Ministry's position is clear. This violates every principle of modern aerial warfare. Esmond clears his throat. Sir, with respect, the Beaufort's loss rate is 78%. The principles of modern aerial warfare are killing our air crews at an unsustainable rate. The room erupts. The Beaufort failures are not design flaws. You're comparing apples and oranges, training exercises versus combat operations. We have Barracudas entering production, modern aircraft with proper armor and speed. Harris raises his hand for silence. Commander, explain how an aircraft with a maximum speed of 138 miles per hour survives against destroyers with radar-directed flak batteries. Esmond steps to the map board. Sir, it doesn't need to outrun the flak. It needs to be invisible to the radar and too slow for accurate tracking. The Swordfish at 50 feet altitude creates a radar return indistinguishable from wave clutter. At 90 miles per hour, destroyer gunners trained against high-speed targets consistently miss the deflection angle. We documented this across 7 attack runs against 6 different vessels. He presents the data: target acquisition times, radar lock failures, fire control solutions that assumed 180-mile-per-hour targets and missed slow-flying aircraft by 60 yards or more. Troubridge speaks up from the corner. What about fighter interception? A Messerschmitt 109 has a top speed of 350 miles per hour. Night operations, sir. The Swordfish carries 3 crewmen: pilot, observer, and telegraphist airgunner. The observer navigates by dead reckoning, while the pilot focuses on terrain following. We can conduct torpedo attacks in total darkness, at altitudes where fast monoplane fighters dare not operate. Admiral Lister studies the test results. Commander, your data shows 0 losses across 7 practice attacks. But these were friendly vessels expecting you. Combat conditions involve surprise, flak, and evasive maneuvering. Yes, sir, which is why I request authorization for 1 combat trial. Squadron 825 is operational. Give us 1 mission against a confirmed target. If we achieve better results than Beaufort squadrons at equivalent or lower loss rates, expand the Doctrine. If we fail, Esmond pauses. If we fail, I personally guarantee no other squadron commanders will waste time on obsolete tactics. Harris shakes his head. This is madness. You're asking permission to deliberately fly below design safety limits. The design safety limits are peacetime regulations, Esmond interrupts. Sir, we're losing the war at sea. In the last month, U-boats sank 220,000 tons of shipping. At current rates, Britain faces starvation by November. Every Beaufort squadron we lose is 12 irreplaceable air crews and 12 aircraft that took 8 months to build. The Swordfish are already built. The crews are already trained. The only question is whether we use them effectively or watch them gather dust while waiting for aircraft that won't arrive in time. The room falls silent. Lister looks at Harris. Something unspoken passes between them. Finally, Lister speaks. Commander Esmond, you'll have your combat trial. 1 mission. But understand this. If your tactics result in casualties equivalent to standard operations, this Doctrine dies immediately. We're not sacrificing air crews to prove a theory. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. As Esmond exits, Troubridge follows him into the corridor. Commander, I hope you're right, because if you're wrong, you just volunteered your squadron for a suicide mission. Esmond looks back at the closed door. Lieutenant, we're already on a suicide mission. I'm just trying to make it survivable. If you're finding this story compelling, please hit that subscribe button. We bring you these untold stories of innovation and courage twice a week, and your support helps us continue researching these incredible pieces of history. North Sea, April 2nd, 1940, 2,215 hours. 9 Swordfish from Squadron 825 fly in loose formation, 50 feet above black water. No running lights, no radio transmissions. Navigation by dead reckoning and moonlight. Esmond rides in the lead aircraft, piloted by Lieutenant Commander W.J.C. Clifford. Their target, German destroyer Z-33, intercepted 3 hours earlier by Royal Navy submarine Ursula. The destroyer is transporting supplies to German forces in Norway. Intelligence estimates it's carrying ammunition, fuel, and potentially 200 Wehrmacht troops. The Beaufort squadron, based at RAF Lossiemouth, declined the mission. Night torpedo attack against a maneuvering destroyer? That's not a mission, that's a funeral. Esmond volunteered Squadron 825 immediately. At 50 feet, the Swordfish crews feel every thermal, every wind shift. The fabric skin vibrates constantly. Spray from wave tops mists the windscreens. This is not flying. This is controlled falling through hostile darkness. 2,247 hours. The observer in Esmond's aircraft, Sub-Lieutenant J.B. Murray, spots the target's wake, a phosphorescent trail in the dark water. Hand signal to Clifford. The pilot banks gently left. The formation splits. 3 aircraft attack from starboard, 3 from port. 3 hold back for a second wave. Standard Doctrine, which Esmond just rewrote 3 weeks ago, would send all 9 simultaneously. But that creates congestion, confusion, friendly fire risks. The new doctrine emphasizes patience over overwhelming force. Aboard Z-33, the watch officer stares at his radar screen. Nothing. The Type FUMO-28 radar, Germany's most advanced naval set, shows only wave clutter. The destroyer's commander, Korvettenkapitän Hans Meyer, isn't concerned. His vessel carries 8 20mm flak guns, 4 37mm guns, and radar-directed fire control. No British aircraft has successfully attacked at night since September. 2,251 hours. A lookout shouts, "Aircraft, starboard side, incredibly low." Meyer rushes to the bridge. He sees them now. 3 biplanes, impossibly slow, skimming the wave tops. His first thought, are those trainers? Did the British send training aircraft? His second thought is interrupted by the first torpedo hitting amidships. The explosion tears a 20-foot hole below the waterline. The Z-33 immediately lists 8 degrees. Meyer screams orders, damage control, counter-flooding, fire stations. Before the crew responds, a second torpedo strikes the stern, destroying the rudder assembly. The third aircraft releases. Meyer watches the torpedo track toward his ship, unable to maneuver, unable to evade. It strikes forward, flooding the bow compartments. 3 hits in 90 seconds. 3 different aircraft, 3 different approach angles, 3 perfectly coordinated attacks. Meyer later writes in his after-action report, "We never heard them approaching. Our radar provided no warning. By the time visual spotting occurred, they were inside our defensive perimeter. Our flak crews, trained to track fast monoplane bombers, could not adjust to targets flying at estimated 140 kilometers per hour. The engagement was over before we understood what was attacking us." The Z-33 begins sinking by the bow. Meyer orders abandon ship at 22:59 hours. The destroyer slips beneath the surface at 23:07 hours, 16 minutes from first contact to final plunge. Of the 9 attacking Swordfish, 9 returned to base safely. 0 combat losses. 3 confirmed torpedo hits from 8 torpedoes dropped. A 37.5% hit rate. The Beaufort squadrons average 4.2%. April 11, 1940. HMS Furious launches 12 Swordfish against German shipping off Bergen. The squadron, using Esmond's tactics, sinks 1 transport and damages 2 others. 11 aircraft return. The single loss occurs when a pilot attempts a high-speed approach, modern tactics, and crashes during torpedo release. May 15, 1940. 18 Swordfish attack the German-occupied port of Rotterdam. Flying at night at 50 feet altitude, they sink or damage 14 vessels, totaling 42,000 tons. 16 aircraft returned safely. The naval staff examines the results. Since implementing low-altitude night tactics, Swordfish squadrons have conducted 37 combat missions. They've sunk or damaged 127,000 tons of Axis shipping. Squadron losses, 3.8%, compared to Beaufort Squadron's 71% casualty rate over the same period. Admiral Lister issues the order on June 3, 1940. All Fleet Air Arm squadrons transition to Swordfish tactics pending Barracuda availability. Low-altitude night operations are now standard doctrine. November 11, 1940, Taranto Harbor. 21 Swordfish from HMS Illustrious execute history's most devastating carrier air raid. Flying at night, at altitudes between 40 and 60 feet, they penetrate Italian defenses and torpedo 6 battleships. 3 are sunk, 3 heavily damaged. The Italian battle fleet, which outnumbered the Royal Navy in the Mediterranean, is crippled in one night. 2 Swordfish are lost. The Japanese naval staff studies Taranto extensively. 14 months later, they replicate the tactics at Pearl Harbor. But where the Swordfish achieved surprise through slowness and stealth, Japanese Kates rely on speed and overwhelming numbers. The principle remains. Naval aviation has changed forever. February 12, 1942, the English Channel. Lieutenant Commander Eugene Esmonde, now leading Squadron 825, receives orders to attack the German battleships Scharnhorst and Gneisenau during their daylight channel dash. It's a suicide mission. 6 Swordfish against heavily defended capital ships, in daylight, with Messerschmitt fighter cover. Esmond knows the tactical doctrine he created doesn't apply. Night operations, surprise, isolated targets. The channel dash violates every principle that made the Swordfish effective. He leads the attack anyway. All 6 Swordfish are shot down. There are no survivors. Esmond receives a posthumous Victoria Cross. But his sacrifice isn't meaningless. The attack delays the German fleet long enough for RAF bombers to damage both battleships. Neither vessel becomes fully operational again. The Swordfish story continues through 1945, but this is a good moment to remind you that deep-dive historical research like this takes weeks of work. If you appreciate these untold stories, consider joining our Patreon community, where we share extended research materials and behind-the-scenes content. Link in the description. Between 1940 and 1945, Swordfish squadrons fly 26,200 combat missions. They sink 2 destroyers, 6 E-boats, 12 U-boats, 1 submarine, and 680,000 tons of Axis shipping. Overall squadron losses 8.7%, the lowest of any Allied torpedo bomber. Berlin, May 1945. Allied intelligence teams interrogating Kriegsmarine officers discover something remarkable in captured German naval records. The German Navy maintained threat assessments for every Allied aircraft type. The Swordfish rating, Höchstbedrohung, highest threat. Vice Admiral Otto Ciliax, who commanded German destroyer flotillas through 1942, later writes, "We feared the Swordfish more than any other British aircraft. It appeared without warning. Its torpedoes never missed, and shooting it down was nearly impossible. Our gunners, trained against fast targets, could not adapt to something that flew slower than our patrol boats moved." The irony is perfect. The aircraft every expert dismissed as obsolete became the weapon no enemy could counter. The production numbers tell the story. Fairey Aviation built 2,391 Swordfish between 1936 and 1944. That's more than double the production run of the modern Beaufort. The last Swordfish squadron remains operational until May 21, 1945, 6 years after military analysts declared it obsolete. It becomes the only biplane to serve frontline combat duty through the entire war. But Esmond's tactical innovations outlive the aircraft. The principles he established, low-altitude approach, radar evasion through slow speed, night operations, coordinated attacks, become foundational doctrine for anti-ship warfare. Modern naval strike tactics still emphasize surprise over speed, precisely calculated attacks over overwhelming force. The Exocet missile that sinks HMS Sheffield in 1982 flies at 50 feet altitude. The Harpoon anti-ship missile uses sea-skimming radar evasion. These weapons are Esmond's Doctrine executed with modern technology. Proof that his insights about naval combat remain valid 80 years later. As for recognition, Esmond receives his Victoria Cross posthumously. The squadrons receive battle honors. But Esmond never sought fame. His personnel file contains a note written 3 months before his death. "I don't want medals. I want my crews to come home." They did. The squadrons he trained, the tactics he developed, the doctrine he fought bureaucracy to implement, all of it saved hundreds of lives. Pilots who should have died flying Beauforts survived, because Esmond proved that obsolete didn't mean ineffective. In 1957, the Fleet Air Arm decommissions its last Swordfish. Veterans gather at RNAS Yeovilton for the ceremony. Among them are 82 pilots who flew Esmond's tactics. One pilot, Squadron Leader R.A.B. Tilley, later writes, "We called him Granddad. We mocked his obsession with old aircraft. Then he showed us how to fight a modern war with ancient weapons. Because of him, we came home." The lesson transcends military history. Esmond succeeded because he questioned assumptions everyone else accepted as truth. Modern isn't always better. Conventional wisdom isn't always wise. Sometimes the solution everyone dismisses is the answer that actually works. The tin can biplane that shouldn't have survived 1939 became the weapon that changed naval warfare forever. Not despite its obsolescence, because of it. Innovation isn't always about building something new. Sometimes it's about seeing old things differently, about recognizing that limitations can become advantages, about having the courage to challenge experts and the humility to let results speak louder than credentials. That's Eugene Esmonde's legacy. That's the Swordfish story. And that's why, 80 years later, we're still learning from a man they called old-fashioned.